Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the James Beard Foundation's Climate Solutions for Restaurant Survival campaign. We are privileged to have you all join us for this briefing on this campaign. I am Anne McBride, Vice President of Programs at the Foundation and the moderator for today's event. We will be taking your questions during the latter part of today's webinar, so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section at any time. We are joined today by Dr. Tara Scully, Director of Curriculum Development at the Global Food Institute at the George Washington University, Mavis-Jay Sanders, Chef Advocate and James Beard Leadership Award winner, and Emma Jagoz, farmer and owner of Moon Valley Farms in Maryland. We are here today to talk about the threats that climate change poses to independent restaurants and the producers who supply them. This is why we launched the Climate Solution for Restaurant Survival campaign. We have been overwhelmed with the great online engagement to date, with chefs from nearly every state joining our briefings and filling out our data collecting surveys. Independent restaurants are integral to the economic, social, and cultural fabric of our nation. They are a powerful expression of the rich cultural diversity and unique culinary history of this country. And they are an important canvas for bringing people and communities together, gathering, socializing, and celebrating all of our life's moments, big and small, around the table. But independent restaurants are not just the heart and soul of our communities. They are also a massive economic force, providing millions of jobs, generating hundreds of billions in revenue, and supporting local agriculture and businesses, from farmers to florists and everything in between. 1 in 10 people work in the restaurant industry as a whole, making it the second largest private sector employer. That's 15.7 million people in 2024. And the food service industry is forecast to reach $1 trillion in revenue in 2024. When we zoom in on independent restaurants, the sector that JBF represents, single location, full service restaurants in the US are the 5th largest industry by employment. That means that 3% of the US workforce, totaling 3.9 million workers, generating $75 billion in wages in local economies across the US and over $209 billion in revenue. It is an industry of small, independent local businesses, but in aggregate, one that represents huge economic scale and value. Independent restaurants are innovative, creative, and resilient at their heart. But even at the best of times, the economic model is really tough, and they operate on the slimmest of margins. Single-digit margins. There is no cushion whatsoever to absorb any shocks to the system. We saw during COVID how vulnerable this sector is, and how even the smallest disruption to the supply chain or exogenous factors impacting operations can be profoundly challenging. Independent restaurants and chefs stand at a critical juncture. Climate change poses an immediate threat to the industry and the millions of people it employs. It's resulting in reduced crop supply and ingredient shortages. Chefs are increasingly exposed to rising and widely fluctuating costs, and we have reduced access to and availability of the ingredients they need. We hear a lot about inflation writ large, but we need to recognize that climate change is a key underlying driver of it. On average, food costs represent 40% of the overall cost base of restaurants, so they are really vulnerable to the increased price of food. If wheat prices are 3 times higher than pre-pandemic, can you imagine what that does to a pizza or pasta restaurant and what that means for the viability of restaurants? Restaurants also face significant operational challenges due to extreme weather disruptions. For example, restaurant owners throughout Texas who built their businesses with a large amount of outdoor space and the presumption of outdoor dining nearly year-round. Just last year, there were 74 days with temperature above 100 in Texas. That means no one is eating outside. And then these past January, temperature dropped to the 20s. So yet again, another weather-related challenge for restaurateurs. And the loss of business that happens in those cases is not sustainable. So we need federal action. We need climate solutions that require the understanding and the support of our lawmakers. We need elected officials to support conservation programs to help farmers implement practices that mitigate climate change, increase yields, and source sustainable ingredients for restaurants. And we need to provide climate smart technical support and capacity building to address the volatile aspects of farming and implement ecological strategies to make land more resilient. We need support for local and sustainable farming practices that diversify our supply chain and provide opportunities for small, mid-sized, and disenfranchised farmers to thrive. And we need sustainable food policies and practices such as crop diversification, regenerative farming, efficient water and energy use, and reduced farm waste. This campaign represents a long-term, sustained effort around issues that unite every chef and restaurant owner across the nation. It is an endeavor requiring all of us to work together. If we do nothing, the impact of climate change will challenge the very viability of independent restaurants and the ecosystem they support. You will hear as much from our next speakers most vividly. The Climate Solutions for Restaurant Survival campaign is grounded in a report that JBF and the Global Food Institute at the George Washington University published on the economic impact of extreme climate events on our supply chain. This collaboration is an important one for us, and I am pleased to introduce as our next speaker, who will tell you more about the report, Dr. Tara Scully, Curriculum Director at the Global Food Institute at the George Washington University. Dr. Scully, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited. This is the first report that has come out of the Global Food Institute here at GW, and I wanted to illustrate the importance of doing research like this. Number one, it's important because small businesses are at the heart of our food system, both at a national level, but also it makes it relevant to us in our communities as well. This type of research is important to tie together all the stories of the struggling business owners to amplify the challenges they are facing. They may not be facing the same exact experiences related to climate change, but these experiences are united because they are connected to regional and national climate events. Because independent restaurants lack the leverage scale of chain restaurants, they are really vulnerable to even one climate-related event. So why should people care? We think that it's not only that these restaurants are cornerstones to our communities where we share birthdays and anniversaries and other celebrations, but their impact on the economy cannot be denied. As Anne pointed out, it's the 5th largest industry in the country, paying almost $75 billion in wages, with an incredibly diverse workforce and owners. The challenges of starting an independent restaurant are well known, but the climate events are heightening these challenges. In an industry which has extremely tight profit margins, just over 4%, and the purchasing accounting for most of their costs, like Anne pointed out, over 40% of their costs come from purchases, the supply chain remains a heavy burden for independent restaurants. Most evident is climate impacts on food production. Farmers are directly impacted as their crop yields could be reduced, and these crop reductions have trickle-down effects to suppliers and restaurants. Reduced crop yield may also cause supply chain disruptions, which can impact independent restaurants through increased pricing, delayed deliveries, and potentially an inability to obtain certain products that are really important for your cultural identity as a restaurant. Low agricultural yields and current inflation are increasing the food prices. As Anne had pointed out, at 8%, 2021 and 22 saw the largest increase in restaurant food pricing in the past 40 years. Furthermore, the USDA reports that all foods are expected to increase back in 2023 alone by 5.8%. The agricultural industry is a critical sector of our US economy, contributing over 1.1 trillion to the US GDP. It accounts for 10.9% of the total US employment, employing 22 million people, with 13 million of them in the food service industry. Overall, the food industry has been growing over time. From 2011 to 2021, the food industry's value increased from 875 billion to 1.25 trillion. Some prime examples of variable disruptions due to climate change are droughts in Texas, as Anne pointed out, hurricanes in Florida, wildfires in California, and temperature changes that are affecting seafood catch as well. These particular states, these 3 states, are important because they, in the industry, are 30% of all the independent restaurants in the US are located in these states, having nearly 1 million employees and paying out 20 billion in wages and generating almost 65 billion in revenue. Texas in particular has been challenged by droughts in 2011 and 2012, as well as in the past 2 years. These were record-breaking temperatures. And they're not just causing crop loss, but also affecting whether or not people go outside. As Anne pointed out, we talked to chefs in the San Antonio area where restaurants are designed for outdoor seating, and especially in this challenging environment of being hot, to attract customers who don't want to sit down and sweat while they're eating. And then in the opposite direction, Texas has also experienced severe cold conditions during the past few years. And it's like you can't win in Texas right now. Hurricanes, of course, are notoriously damaging, whether it's the wind or the rain or both. For one hurricane in Florida, wind damage alone was estimated at $4 billion. Florida's crops are clearly being affected, but also aquaculture as well. The fishing industry gets put on hold when a hurricane forms. Restaurants have to not only shut down during hurricanes, but when they reopen, they're not getting the regular catch for quite some time because of the long-lasting effects of the hurricane. Of the top 20 largest California wildfires recorded since 1932, 18 out of 20 have occurred in the past 20 years, with 9 of those occurring in the past 3 years. In 2023, year to date, there have been over 300,000 acres affected by more than 7,400 wildfires. Most astonishingly, in 2020, over 4 million acres were affected. Not only does this destroy crops, but it also can result in smoke taint. This is especially impactful on grape production, and it forces the winemaker to either choose to make wine that has smoke taint or skip a year, which can be a huge financial burden. On top of that is the impact on restaurant attendance. No one wants to go outside. I think anyone on the East Coast, you saw it last year with the Canadian fires, which we're expecting more this year. You don't want to go outside when you can't see, a few feet in front of you. So lastly, then there are the warming waters, resulting in changes to seafood habitat range. From lobsters to sea bass, these species have very specific temperature requirements. This not only affects the fishing industry, but also access to certain fish for independent restaurants. We are not alone. In 2020, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction report saw that 4,200 reported natural disasters were recorded from the 80s and the 90s. This increased in the next 2 decades to 7,300. This had a doubling effect on human death from 500,000 in the first 2 decades to over 1.2 million in the second 2 decades. And although this increase should be shocking, what's more disturbing are the trends of these disasters in the last few years. The global average annual recorded of storms has increased by 19%, floods by 23%, and wildfires by 29%. This, of course, all of these stories have an effect on food production, transportation challenges, and even customer behavior, like going out to a restaurant anymore. So this is what our report showed, and we're very excited about the future of policies that are going to help prevent these issues for our restaurateurs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scully. I'm going to put in the chat the link to our webpage for the campaign, where you can find the report as well as other material. And a reminder that you can put your questions at any time in the Q&A section of the Zoom. We are now going to hear directly from a chef on how extreme climate events are impacting her business and what she's hearing in the industry also. I am pleased to pass the microphone to Mavis-Jay Sanders, chef, advocate, and James Beard Leadership Award honoree.
Amazing. All right, so they've got the stats. I've got your story. My name is Mavis-Jay Sanders. It's amazing to be here. I'm well known in the education and access spaces, and I am super passionate about that. But if I was going to be 100% honest, what I'd be saying was that I actually got into food because I was obsessed with flavor. It's like my own personal obsession with finding the perfect bite. And I feel like the bite I'm talking about. It's like when you have a spoonful of something and you put it to your lips, it touches your palate, and all of a sudden your eyes flutter, like close, and you like breathe in super deep, and you're like inhaling all of the aroma like in your head and your body. And it just like transports you to another memory or a place, or maybe just like you're like looking deep within. It just resonates in a way. That's why I got involved in food. Like that's why I made it my career, chasing that bite. And my career has gone from being a cook to an owner to an educator, right? So I went from being a person chasing that bite to a person creating environments where people could experience that bite to a person who now has the privilege of teaching like the brilliant culinary minds of tomorrow how to be obsessed with flavor, how to craft that perfect bite in a way that's responsible and sustainable, because I really do believe that like food is joy. So if you'll take a ride with me, I come from a place where children climb trees, right? I'm talking like 20, 30 feet in the air, like bountiful prizes of like oranges and mangoes, grapefruits, peaches from Georgia. And like we would eat them till like our bellies were full, our hearts were full. And then we try to scale down, like not worried about breaking an arm, but more worried about not losing all the fruit that we had like captured in our shirt that we had turned up, like using for pouches. And so we could have some later so we could share with our family, like just wanting to share the bounty and everything that nature produces beautifully, right? So peaches are definitely my favorite, like whether it's from my family's land or whether it's from like a neighboring Georgian, farmer land. I love them, but I've never liked peach tea, like couldn't stand it. It doesn't taste like peaches. I don't like the way mouthfeel. I don't like the way it smells. Keep it. Stay with me. All right, so fast forward. I'm in New York, culinary school, all about technique. We're doing, Michelin star, James Beard Award winning chefs, doing great. One day I get into work and the chefs, knowing that I'm from Georgia, are super excited to share with me a peach. And, the sous chef, I see him, he like tosses me a freshly washed one. He takes a huge bite out of it. He's elated. He's having a great time with it. And I'm like, bet, I'm so excited. I'm about to be transported. I'm hyped. I bite into this peach. I'm disgusted. I swear. I'm just like, what is this? And it hits me. It tasted like peach tea. And then I was thinking, how many people have been eating this thinking that they know what a real peach tastes like? And how many things are there out in the world that I don't know what it's really supposed to taste like? And my mind is blown, like forever changed. Decades later, this becomes like the crux of the educational programming that I do, right? So it's about the recognition and pursuit of really good, amazing flavor. Most culinary programs, when they're training cooks, right? They say, okay, you're gonna start first day, we're gonna teach you sanitation and we're gonna teach you cutting. And that's cool. And they're like, cool, first thing, you get into the kitchen, don't make anybody sick, chop, 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 put it in the stock, all right? Good class, fine. In my class, we're going for greatness. We're fostering change. We're fostering change makers. We're molding leaders and taste makers. And so everybody, like, look, this is a class you want to take. Everybody wants to take this class. The front row is always the first class to fill up because the first thing we do, the first thing we learn is how to taste. The first thing we do is eat. We are flavor mapping on our palates. We're like learning about our taste buds, why they react that way. It is something that I always incorporate when I'm talking about, when I start this class, talking about the peach story, right? Even so much so that I'll go down to Georgia and bring back up to New York peaches from like neighboring farms, my family's farms, because it's such a pivotal class and we can taste together, do like yellow watermelons and things like that, right? It's to make sure that they have a good grasp on the end goal, right? So that they can understand how they want to get to the layering flavors, the depths, and it gives them like a cutting edge perspective and attention to detail so that they have when they actually start doing like practical culinary fundamentals, right? So I believe personally, like that's what leads to greatness, right? Like I want them to be great. They want them to be great. You want them to be great. You know what does not want them to be great? Climate change. Promise. Climate change showed up last April as frost, and late April as a frost that killed all the blossoms in the orchard, and there was no fruit for the season. Ultimately, I had to pull that story and that exercise from the class because I couldn't find the right fruits, right? So orchards tend to be a little bit more vulnerable than you would if you think about farmers who might be like tilling and planting like in the soil, just because if the right circumstances prevail, a farmer could end up using raised beds, or if they have the money, they can like invest in a greenhouse. But if you have an orchard, you're just vulnerable to what's happening with the climate. So if it's like avocados or people who have like walnut trees or any kind of citrus, they're a lot more vulnerable. Another instance, if you will imagine, you know, my family's farm, 96 acres heritage farm, much like many across the country, planted grain sorghum with expectations of like a bountiful harvest, right? I had excitement. I was super excited to bring young people who've never left New York, you know, a product, something they've never seen before. And, you know, climate change had other plans. For 15 days, relentless rain. We lost acres and acres of sorghum. And while I'm over here with just shattered lessons plans, my family has to deal with the financial burden of that, which can be very taxing. We talk about, you know, the summers killed, like the heat was killing the peanuts and killing the yield of the corn crops that are on my family's farm. It being warmer winters and the insects, you know, make farmers have to consider, or our farmers have to consider using chemicals when they don't want to, you know, and at this point, it's become like a heartbreaking, like regular cycle. So all in all, today, I'm here to ask for your support for conservation programs to help farmers implement practices that can mitigate climate change, increase yields, and source sustainable ingredients for restaurants and educational spaces. We also need climate smart technical support and capacity building to address volatile aspects of farming and implement strategies to make the land more resilient, so independent restaurants and farms don't lose their livelihoods, so we don't lose the joy of food, and so we also don't lose the perfect break. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Mavis-Jay. Thank you for painting so vividly what a world without peaches sounds like, and I don't think any of us wants that. Our next speaker is Emma Jagoz, farmer and owner of Moon Valley Farm in Maryland. So some of you might have already tasted the delicious bounty of Emma, if not in restaurants, from her CSA or at farmers market. Take it away, Emma.
Hey, everyone. My name is Emma Jagoz, and I am a first-generation self-taught farmer who founded Moon Valley Farm in 2012. Today, Moon Valley Farm is a 70-acre certified organic vegetable farm and food hub that focuses on climate-resilient farming practices. Moon Valley Farm grows and delivers all year round to a 750-plus member community-supported agriculture program, to hundreds of a la carte customers to their homes, to over 100 restaurants in the DMV, including dozens of Michelin star and James Beard winners, and also local school systems. We collaborate with over 50 farmers and makers to increase our product diversity and quantity of specialty and staple food. Climate change is the biggest threat to my business and livelihood, and farmers need policy change and financial support to survive. Extreme weather patterns increase our need for greenhouse infrastructure to ensure consistent year-round harvests that restaurants count on. Erratic temperature swings greatly increase our risk of crop loss early and late in the season, so we need to move many of our plantings inside greenhouses instead of the fields. Using greenhouses is actually really effective, yet it requires massive upfront costs. We're building greenhouse number 10 right now. I can hear the drills. The cost of our 1 acre of high tunnels is around $250,000, and I estimate we need another 2 acres in greenhouse infrastructure to ensure high quality crops in all seasons. Climate change is warming winters faster. This causes additional pest life cycles. As fewer pests are killed off, they're able to emerge and reproduce earlier in the year, which means we have to start using inputs to combat this, and it increases our costs. Warming winters also cause crop diseases to come earlier. So this increased diseases and increased pests means that we have increased crop damage, lower margins, lower availability, unless we increase this input use. And unfortunately, our input costs have risen 50% in the past 5 years, damaging our already thin margins. Restaurants aren't the only ones with thin margins around here. To survive, we've had to increase our prices across the board. For example, the restaurant Rooster and Owl was paying $36 a case for Sun Gold tomatoes back in 2018. And in 2023, they cost $54 a case, a pretty large increase. Thunderstorms and winds cause power outages that affect our cold storage, which ensures food safety, necessitating additional investments in backup generators. Ours cost $15,000 to prevent massive food loss. Increased hail events cause major tree fruit and field-grown produce losses. In just 2023, our region's biggest peach harvest was ruined by hail, rendering all the fruit seconds and dramatically decreasing its value and shelf life. Droughts decrease yields of reliable crops like winter squash. In 2022, we lost 30,000 pounds of squash due to drought. And actually, when the crops are drought ridden, they don't last as long in storage either. Oyster is one of our restaurant customers who relies on our specialty winter squash varieties, including honey nut. That's the right size and flavor profile for their dish, but due to our crop loss, the menu had to be limited and ultimately changed. Climate change causes heavier storms with increased rainfall, increasing nutrient runoff and soil erosion, damaging waterways, and of course, our bottom lines. Crop losses are happening with increased regularity. Extreme heat causes blossom drop in nightshades, which is peppers, eggplant, tomatoes. It causes bolting in brassicas, like broccoli and cauliflower, and our salad mixes. It also causes salad to be bitter and not taste as good. Extreme cold ruins our winter greens. Drought decreases the yield in storage crops, and hail decreases the yield in greens. Farming organically is a key part of Moon Valley Farms' climate resilience strategy because unlike row crop farms, farming organically requires large buffer zones, which help prevent soil erosion even in the case of big rain events. Prioritizing soil health is a key cornerstone of farming organically, which means cover cropping much of our acreage instead of cash cropping it to help smother weeds, restore nutrients, and protect the soil microbiome. Farming organically means making investments in beneficial insect planting, and all of these investments require farmers like me to have extra land, extra labor, extra seed money to execute these strategies. But in years where our main crops are destroyed due to climate extremes, we struggle to make ends meet and cannot afford to make these necessary investments without additional support. And we know that restaurants cannot absorb all of our rising costs. As you can see, those who are brave enough to be essential farmers in a changing climate need policy change. We need funding for climate smart practices, including high tunnels and windbreaks and the labor to execute those practices. We need support for food hubs who aggregate, value add, market, sell, and distribute food. Investment in first generation and female farmers like myself, as well as minority, young, and veteran farmers who lead the way in implementing organic, socially just, and climate smart practices. My organic farm and hub sells to over 100 restaurants in the Mid-Atlantic region, including some of the top chefs in the world. And you should go eat at those restaurants because it's really delicious. I believe that farmers have the power to be a solution to climate change and not just a victim of it. Without bold policy change to mitigate climate change to support farmers like me, local farms, and your favorite independent restaurant may not survive. The future of food and our climate all depends on the action we take today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you for overcoming challenge after challenge that it takes to farm these days to produce the beautiful and delicious food that you produce day in, day out. We will now take questions if you have them. You can put them in the Q&A section of the website. And I will mention again that you can go to jamesbeard.org to look at material that we have there, including the report with the Global Food Institute at the George Washington University. We have social media assets if any of you are interested. We have a take action summary that we share with chefs that digest the information present in the report in 2 pages for them to be able to speak to you all about this and their issues. And we also have surveys that we are in which we are collecting data from chefs on how many days they have been closed, what is their revenue loss, have they had to lay off people as a result of extreme climate events. So if any of you want data for your states, as we continue growing the campaign and as we continue gathering that information, we will be able to share it with you. So do not hesitate to reach out. Whether you want that kind of information or you want to ask questions, Patricia Griffin and Amber Singh of NVG will follow up with you all afterwards. We'll send you the link and you can address any questions to them. They will route it to us, to Mavis-Jay or to Emma and to Dr. Scully if they're not directly for them. So do not hesitate. So since there are no immediate question, I will just express my gratitude to all of you for joining us today and to hear about this critical campaign that JBF has launched. As you've heard from all of our speakers, the rising costs that restaurants and farmers and thus customers are enduring as a result of extreme climate are becoming untenable. Without bold policy changes, independent restaurants are having to pass costs to customers, lay off workers, or worse, ultimately shutter their businesses. Legislators must address climate change before the restaurant and the broader food system economy collapse. This campaign is intended to spur real change, to catalyze action urgently. We are committed to working with chefs and with lawmakers around the country to drive the change needed. This means that the voices of the chefs that we can bring to you all for support as you are continuing to do work around legislation that supports climate change mitigation is really, really key. So call on us. We will bring you voices who can support you in this work. We can share more stories with you all, and we'll put you in touch with chefs and with farmers directly. And you will also see more advocacy work from the Beard Foundation on a range of issues as we continue to push for the priorities enshrined in our policy agenda in close collaboration with our vast network of powerful chef advocates. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and we look forward to continuing working with you all.